Sewu, here we are.
Yes, we made it.
We made it. You made it all the way from
Accra, Ghana.
Yeah.
Yes, 20 hours in total.
I think you get the award for distance longest travel. I think, Scott, maybe I don't
Oh,
know.
really?
Yeah.
Wow, wow.
But this conference quickly has gone from national in scope to international. And that's a testament to Scott and Kelly and the entire team at LSI. So thank you for having us this morning.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
And we're going to just have three parts to this conversation. The first is I invite Sewu to give us an overview of the market in Africa and any particular insights he wants to share. Then I'll have a few questions to dig a little bit deeper. Are there particular markets you like, South Africa versus Ghana, for example? We'll go through a few of those questions. And then if this sparks any thoughts, reactions, questions from the audience, we'll open it up to the audience for questions. And I have the fancy timer, so I know when we'll get a little, everyone will be ready to convene this.
Sure.
But for now, Sewu, please help us understand the market.
So maybe I can introduce myself very shortly. Yeah. So my name is Sewu-Steve Tawia. I'm originally from Ghana. I've got more than 20 years experience across, I would say, three main career changes. I started in sales and trading, equity, fixed income, and exotic derivatives. Went to 6 years in consulting, strategy, operations, in Europe mostly. And then decided in 2009 to switch to private equity venture capital, work for one of the biggest managers in Europe, European Investment Fund, 30 billion under management, investing in funds. I thought that my life in Luxembourg was a bit too quiet and moved to Ghana, where I'm originally from, in December 2014. And since then, I've managed different asset classes in agriculture, renewable energy, and decided to tackle one of the biggest challenges on the continent, which is healthcare. And today, I'm the managing partner of Jaza Rift Ventures, which is a 50 million target fund targeting digital health, medtech, and biotech on the continent, really focusing on early stage investment, so pre-seed Series A, ticket size is 200 to 2 million, and really looking forward to build an ecosystem, do local and international partnership. So to come back to your question, when I told friends that I was going to healthcare, I said, look, why healthcare? And the key determinant of that was to realize that my mother had been a nurse, MPH plus master's in palliative care, has been working in healthcare, mostly in Europe, but then also started to do things on the continent and realized that she didn't have the tools to do so, right? That was number one. And number two, except for me pretty much, a lot of my family members are gynecologists, doctors, anesthesiologists. And I thought that there was also an alignment of interest with an organization called Vigro Africa that has been an incubator and accelerator in this space for the last 8 years. So we partnered to set up Jaza Rift Ventures. For medtech, healthcare generally in Africa, and these are very striking numbers. Africa's population is 1.4 billion today, poised to be about 2.5 billion by 2050. There is an annual healthcare financing gap of 66 billion. Mostly infrastructure, yes, but technology, devices, biotech, you name it, is there. And so when we realized that, so look, this is a monster we cannot solve on our own, we still to build the rails and the technologies using both locally developed, low resource, energy efficient ones, and use international solutions to do so. And that's how basically the fund was set up. So the market for healthcare on the continent, in terms of fundraising and investment by venture capital organizations or investors in general, I will say, is about 180 million per year for the last 5 years, compared to funds that have been raised by across the continent, all sectors included in venture capital, about, I would say this year is tracking in February at 217 million, but annually it went from 1.4 billion 7 years ago to, at the peak of it, 4.5 billion, and then last year was about 2.4 billion. So what I'm going to say is that it's really an emerging market, right? And the opportunity set is driven by 4 mega trends. I don't want to lecture people, but essentially I want to talk about these important mega trends on the continent. One is population growth, I mentioned that. The other one is urbanization. So out of those 1.4 billion people today on the continent, 50% are urban or peri-urban. Okay, I'm going to ask a question. Do you know the average or the median age on the continent? In the US, it's about 45.
We're old in the U.S. I think that's a leading question. I have a sense, but
Yeah.
is it 20, 25?
No, 18.
Wow.
Median age on the continent is 18, poised for doubling. So there's a long-term magnitude of growth that is there that it seems to be not many people are seeing, right? And so essentially, when you look at it, I thought to myself, look, let me be one of the early actors in the space on the continent to start driving better, affordable healthcare. And I'll give you a bit more about the thesis so that you understand where we're going. We realize that today, with the technologies that are available for digital, medical, and biotech, massively accelerated by AI and machine learning, there's a huge opportunity for Africa and emerging markets in general to leapfrog, right? And so that means that with those 4 mega trends, I mentioned urbanization, growing population, digitization. Mostly, we majority go on the internet, not on a laptop, but on a phone. Yes, right? And the last one I'll mention on the mega trend to conclude on that is, against all the doom and gloom during COVID times, right, we demonstrated our resilience. We actually grew, even some of the countries grew during COVID, which is a bit crazy to understand. And so with these 4 mega trends, we realize with those technologies, if you're at home, in the office, or in transit, urban, peri-urban, or in remote areas, and some of those solutions actually can apply even here in remote areas. When you look at the US, the middle belt, population density is very low. It can be applied. There's a huge opportunity to, essentially, this is our thesis, to bring healthcare to people and people to healthcare when it's needed. So that means that home, office, or in transit, if anything happens to you, we can bring a device, right, that can diagnose you and essentially, maybe via digital medicine prescriptions, give you a prescription so that I can go to the pharmacy, and if you cannot move, we send somebody to get it for you and bring it to your home or wherever you are in the office. So that's, in summary, the thesis, and I've gone a bit ahead to talk about other things, but then I just got motivated.
Yeah. Boy, you're doing great for 7:15 in the morning, man. Boom.
With jet lag.
So you sent me in a really intriguing article about how 2 different countries, 2 different markets in Africa responded to COVID-19 with access to ventilators.
Correct.
And when I read it, it seemed to me that South Africa was a success and they had figured it out.
Yeah.
And the other country, not so much. What are your findings or insights from what makes one country be able to figure out medtech and another not?
I think that there's several elements. One is the general private sector and public sector interest and drive to find a common solution, right? That's number one. Number two is usually the depth of the regulatory environment that enables that to happen, right? And the case of South Africa is pretty clear. South Africa has been developing medtech solutions for the longest time ever. They have actually a major cluster of biotech and medtech between Cape Town and Stellenbosch for biotech, and to some extent medtech, but also around Johannesburg for medtech. And then other countries also have different clusters. But the key determinant is a public-private partnership to make it happen. That's what really was the driver. I can give you the case of Ghana. We also managed to really have a coordinated public-private partnership between the Ministry of Health, public and private healthcare facilities to really drive those solutions much faster. So it really depends on each country. And I have to remind people, it's 54 countries. It's not just Africa, right?
I love the topic, the headline, investing in Africa, but South Africa is much different than Zimbabwe, which is much different than Nigeria.
Correct.
And my sense, and you don't notice, you're giving me a lot of free education. My sense is Ghana's a fairly mature life science hub. Right. South Africa is probably one of the most mature hubs, but then there are many countries that need to catch up. Is that kind of fair?
Correct. But again, so we tend to break it down in our verticals. So digital health, medtech, and biotech. And then we also have what we call enabling themes that enable those three verticals to thrive or not, okay? So what I would say is that depending on what you're looking at, some countries may be either marginally or substantially better than others. So I'll give you a very striking example. Tunisia came out of nowhere and became the biggest exit with BioNTech buying InstaDeep on the continent last year, right? So BioNTech bought a biotech company, bought a biotech company called InstaDeep for $750 million. That was the biggest exit on the continent, but hardly any newspapers talked about it because they don't really understand healthcare. They always talk about fintech. So Tunisia now has become a hotbed of biotech innovations because of that major exit. It attracted a lot of people. Ghana has Umachi Biotech, has Revna Biosciences, and a few other key hospitals that are really driving biotech innovation and then are therefore attracting entrepreneurs and investors there. Yeah, so it really depends on the country. There are clusters. What I would say is South Africa has been ahead of the game for a long time for different reasons. But I think a number of countries are catching up and there's a clear national interest in doing so. A clear example is Rwanda.
Oh, Rwanda.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
You know, in the States, there's a general formula for innovation ecosystems that include universities, strategics, startups.
Yeah.
And my general sense is there are some large strategics that have had a presence in Africa. Do you see a role for them in this emerging medtech ecosystem? I know I'm thinking about a few Japanese pharmaceutical companies that will do JVs with digital health companies to kind of get a sense of what's going on in the U.S. market. Do you see any parallels for Africa?
I totally agree with that. So what we've noticed has been happening for the last 5 years is that you have a large number of Japanese entities coming to invest in Africa through mostly funds.
Okay.
Right?
Fund of funds.
Yeah, so they come. So I'll mention specifically JETRO, JICA, and there's another one. I forgot the name. So what I do is essentially a lot of those Japanese conglomerates try and partner with tech startup, but because usually they don't have the foothold on the ground, they go through investment companies or other partners. They run innovation program with Vigro, for instance, etc., so that they get the pipeline and then start looking into the market. What I would say is that it was non-coordinated before, but now it's getting more and more coordinated. But what I would say is that, funny enough, the Japanese are kind of late at the game. Yeah. Stanford Biodesign has been on the continent for 5-6 years now.
Yes.
Right? And then so many other organizations, American one, Johns Hopkins, et cetera, are being on the continent doing work on the ground, but most of the time looking at the donor lens, accelerators, incubator, donor programs. Now they're more and more looking at the commercial investment opportunity, and that is what is of interest to me, because basically I could be raising funds with these corporates and strategic partners to develop the ecosystem, obviously do tech transfer and other things, yeah.
And when we were talking yesterday, you had a point of view about NGOs as funding sources for innovation ecosystems, and they weren't high on your list. Is that right?
Let me put it this way. Unfortunately, donor programs have been massively developed on the continent. They've done a lot of good, but I think now the market on the continent is maturing enough for them to start thinking more public-private partnership. And I even coined a business model that I'm not sure is very much used here. So obviously we have a B2B, B2C, or B2B2C, or B2G in business to government, right? But what is actually happening a lot of times on the continent is that we have B2D, business to donors, where a donor program, a WHO, a UNICEF, etc., would run a certain number of programs, and startups would leverage on that to develop a solution for business to donors mode, while actually converting that to a B2B or B2C play down the road. So it's a easier access to free capital, donors, and commercial capital through donors, and then start developing a more commercially viable business. Yeah.
So that's one pathway, but I think what I'm also hearing is the classic JVs or strategics can work in Africa. Innovation hubs like Stanford's Biodesign program can work in Africa. That's encouraging. I have to throw in a regulatory question because I'm a regulatory guy. Even this early in the morning, maybe it'll wake people up. Hopefully it won't put people to sleep. Which countries in Europe, because you've been to 34 countries in the continent.
Personally and business-wise, yeah.
This is so much fun, man. You've been to 34 continents. So
Not always.
on your grading sheet, which countries have the best regulatory frameworks, ministries of health to really accelerate growth?
That's a tough one. Again, depends on what you're looking at. So biotech, I would say South Africa, Egypt. Yeah. South Africa, Egypt. Medtech, again, South Africa, number 1 or 2. But Nigeria is not bad. Tunisia is not bad, right? And then on the digital health side, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, maybe number 3. But the key thing I have to say about regulatory approvals is that hardly any country on the continent actually has a medtech track. So it's either depending on the pharmacy boards or the food and drug.
Okay.
Right? But there's no specific, even within the food and drug, they would usually attach it to either of the pharmacies, very limited to biotech. So there's no dedicated medtech devices. And so the shortcut a lot of the entrepreneurs take, not shortcut really, but they get local regulatory approval, but they actually have to work it out and educate the regulators on their own product so that they get approval. It's like, I always say, on the continent, we fly the plane while we're building it, because this is literally the case. Now, a lot of companies, once they get local regulatory approval, what we advise them, and we walk them through the process, get a CE mark or US FDA. And usually what happens is that when you have a CE mark or US FDA, you can actually scale much faster. Let's say from Kenya, you got the local approval. And then once you have a CE mark or US FDA or both, then when you present that to any or most of the countries on the continent, it's okay. It's much faster.
You mentioned Tunisia, and I'm reminded of a startup that got the equivalent of NIH funding. It was Tunisian government funding to start their company. And they were, I'm almost certain, at LSI about 3 years ago. Let me get to my question. My question is, do you see the US as the most logical second market for these medtech companies that are grown in African countries, or is the EU the most logical next market for them to go into?
So I must admit to you, we've had inbounds actually from both sides, even Japan actually. Right.
Hi.
And, and look, the size of the market and the risk appetite seems to me much bigger here than Europe because, you have to remember, Europe is not one country. It's several countries with their own regulatory approval. There's no easy passport thing between the countries once you have an approval. At the Euro level, it's easier, but the process the CE mark may be a bit more cumbersome. So I think the natural and more direct market is the US, and we've had opportunities to see that. For instance, we have, a Neopenda, which is one of our portfolio companies.
Yes, Neopenda, yes.
So you know her, Sona?
Yes.
Yes. So it's one of our portfolio company, and she has a US FDA approved device, and she's actually actively marketing it here because she has low production costs. She designed it mostly here, produced, and then scaled on the continent more and more, but then the interest is here also, right? For low resource environments, et cetera, right?
And I'm going to scan it filled up a bit. I'm going to scan the room here, and if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. I just want to pause a minute, but then I'm going to get back to my free education. All right, free education. So for Neopenda, they produced a product for the African market with a lot of African partners. I believe they followed the biodesign approach.
Yeah.
Are they planning to sell that same product in the U.S., or are they going to sell a more, for lack of a better word, fully featured version for the U.S. market? And do you have an opinion about, do you just use that same product that you're selling in Ghana and export it to the U.S., or do you put more bells and whistles on the U.S. version?
So I honestly cannot answer that question because there is their product design. But what I've noticed is we were approached with these kind of requirements. Do you have any interesting medtech product that we can tech transfer to the US that does the same thing with the same health outcomes at a fraction of the cost? Now, what I was hearing is, maybe you have a $1 production cost, but we're going to sell it to people in the US at $100, right? Not $10 in Kenya or Ghana or Nigeria, so the margins, right? So for me, that tells me that actually they wouldn't change the design or increase any features unless customers or patients need it. But as it is, it's a US FDA approved device that can be sold here as is, right? So I think it's more the commercial interest rather than really the different health outcomes they're looking at. Yeah.
So when we were having coffee yesterday, we were sitting there and you said, what these entrepreneurs need is power. And I said, power? You mean like political power? And you said, no, Kwame, like electricity.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the role of infrastructure in medtech in Africa?
No, look, so when we start going to low resource environments, rural areas, etc., what we quickly realize is that for us to really have long-term, sustainable, scalable health outcomes, we need to make sure that all these solutions, as I mentioned, are as close as possible to the patients wherever they are. What happens is that, and I'll take my previous hat as a fund manager or in climate and renewable energy, I was running a program to support renewable energy companies in the agricultural value chain across 7 countries in East Africa, okay? We'll go to a refugee camp in Kakuma, north of Kenya, where the company was supposed to be using solar panels, inverter, and freezer to conserve food, vegetables, whatever, right? So that was part of what I was supposed to do. Guess what? We go to the refugee camp, we go to site cities, and what we realized is that, notably in the refugee camp, it was food, but breast milk that was conserved. Or in the pharmacies, vaccines. all right, to keep the potency for that. So I was thinking, actually, there is a nexus of climate and health that we need to look into so that when we go to the remote areas where they don't have the grid, then we can put solar panel inverters or batteries that one can conserve the medicines, but also since you have power, now you can bring data. And therefore, digital devices, medtech devices that can connect to data and then upload, and then you can have related telemedicine, etc. And now I want to make a point on telemedicine. When I see an entrepreneur or a startup telling me about telemedicine on the continent, I was like, what do you mean? Literally, the telemedicine of having, somebody talk to you, you see a video call, because of power, data, cost, and accessibility, it is not feasible. Apart from peri-urban and urban areas, obviously. Right? So when people tell me about telemedicine, really what I'm seeing in rural areas is USSD, code, short codes, or a phone call, or a text message. That is telemedicine at that level, right? And so when I see entrepreneurs tell me that, that means that they really haven't understood the access, the energy need in remote areas to just deliver healthcare. So one of the models we're looking at with different organizations is what we call community health workers as self-entrepreneurs. And so that probably is a model where we can essentially equip those community health workers as entrepreneurs in climate and health, where they can be selling panels, inverters, and batteries, plus data to make sure that they can deliver healthcare, collect the data, et cetera, with pads and things. There's a whole project around it. So, yeah.
So how do we put some of this into action? Let me tell you why I'm asking this question. So Thena Capital is a VC firm based in the UK. One of our partners is British. I was on a panel with Thena Capital. They invest in medtech in the UK. But Wavemaker 360 Health, the fund that I work with as a venture partner, we don't understand that market. So we would co-invest in a deal where they let it because they know the local market. And by the way, their go-to-market involves the US in the next 6 to 9 months. Is that how a US fund would partner with you?
Absolutely. In fact, so I didn't mention how we are structured as a fund. So we're target 50 million, so we're raising, by the way, fund. The second unit we have internally is transaction advisory, which means basically we would help hospitals, clinics, specialty care to raise $5 million or more. And then the third leg is Jaza Rift Labs, which is basically an internal innovation lab where we're running venture studio programs. And the most interesting part is the launchpad. So that means that within the lab, what we do is the venture studio, but also the launchpad where we say, look, if you are an international company or a fund, you want to have exposure to the continent, we can give you access to our deal flow. And so basically, we actually call it deal flow as a service, very simple, or corporate VC as a service, depending on how you want to do it. So we get access to our deal flow, co-investment rights, and it's helpful for us because, one, we diversify in our risks, in investing with other people. We do the legwork, obviously. And then it's also more capital coming to the companies, right? And then I'll finish on that, on the launchpad. The launchpad is also the opportunity for international entrepreneurs who want to launch on the continent to partner with us, and it will help them do proof of concept and access to market as well, market entry.
You remind me of, in the States, there's a well-known innovation ecosystem called the Fogarty Institute, and they have many of the same elements you described, and investors over the years come to know it as a home in Northern California. So this is exciting. So there's a home in Kenya for medtech investors. And
Kenya and Ghana.
And Ghana. Oh, we can't leave out Ghana. Last question, then we'll open it up for anyone who's been intrigued by this, like I have. My question, Sewu, is around, your conference. There's a conference coming up in Africa in August. It doesn't conflict with Scott's programs. Scott is coming.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the conference?
Yes, very, very much so. So with our partners with Grow Africa, we realized that there's a huge opportunity for medtech on the continent, driven by Wambui, who is our medtech person. She's actually trained here at Stanford, has 3 patents here in the US, and she came back home. And we were brainstorming, etc. one day, 18 months ago, say, actually, why don't we organize a conference? Because all the other ones we're seeing on the continent are really just sales pitches where, big, I will not name any names, but the big guys come and sell devices, etc. So look, actually, why don't we do one that is homegrown and is trying to build the local ecosystem with international startups, not the big guys? And so that's how we started. So we started transforming African MedTech Conference. The next edition is 28th to 30th of August in Nairobi, Kenya. And I always say it's the opportunity to understand the ecosystem, get to know people, but also come for safari.
We're still working on my wife. There's
Yes.
safari coming up. Okay, questions? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here and participating in this.
My pleasure.
When we talk with investors in the U.S. ecosystem, there's often prioritization on focus. Don't try and do everything at once. Do one thing, one
Yeah.
little slice.
Yeah.
The expectation is that there are other ecosystem players who can support the rest of that. You mentioned electricity, contract manufacturing is a similar situation. There are a number of different pieces, and a lot of what's been successful innovation in lower resource environments have required integrating all of these things at once.
Correct.
How does that change the way you think as an investor and the types of things you invest in when the prioritization for a U.S. investor might look quite different because of the differences in private?
That's always my challenge. Thank you for the question. So a lot of people always say, why don't you just do digital health? That's more money, it's scalable, blah, blah, all this thing. Okay, fine. I said, actually, I'm just solving one part of the leg problem, right? And so the other part is, okay, you have digital, fine, but what does the digital build on? You need devices and things, right? So you need to have both. I always talk about phygital, physical and digital, because you cannot have just digital on the continent, you need to have the physical. So more specifically on that, what we believe today is that the market is nascent. So if I project myself in the next 10, 15 years, ultimately we may actually have 3 different funds, right? But for now, we believe that we need to cover the whole spectrum internally because there's a kind of continuum of care and synergies between those 3 that is evident. And I'll give you a striking example. One of my massive, and I'm going to call on anybody who can help me on that, is breast cancer on the continent is a massively underserved challenge, okay? Today, here in the US or Europe, you can go online, Amazon, wherever, buy a BRCA test, or go on 23andMe, do the swab, they tell you if you have the gene or not, and then you can start monitoring on a yearly basis to figure out whether or not you need to have a procedure. It is not readily available on the continent. You have very few labs that are able to do it, okay? And so a key thing for me is to be able to combine data, digital, the device, and then actually help do research. So all 3 are very key for me to make sure that it's a cycle, right? It's what we call a conveyor belt in various ways between us and Vigoro, the way we work, but also between the 3 verticals. Yeah.
And it sounds like, Caitlin, part of the answer may be to target countries with the most robust infrastructure, so power is maybe a little bit less of a problem, but I don't want to speak for you, but is that...
There's that element, but also where is the government and the private sector leading to make it an enabling environment to do so?
Understood.
Right? So Kenya, last year, they published a new digital health bill that was critical for us to have so that all the companies that are in the space in our portfolio really use that to scale.
That's
right?
excellent.
And so 2 of our companies were actually part and parcel of that conversation, building the plane while you're flying it.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's try. Well, I
Time
see
out.
one more, and then we'll go.
Yeah.
When you mentioned B2B, you kind of made a facial expression, and I don't know but are you thinking that B2D, be the donor, like distorts the market, or doesn't actually force entrepreneurs to find like what an actual market price is for their solution or viable business model? Can you elaborate on your facial expression?
Yeah, no, that's sure. So I have a love and hate relationship with donors, right? And so in some instances, they're very critical in starting the race, right, of new innovations, etc., because they have the risk appetite and the funding to do so. But sometimes when I see grantpreneurs, right, it makes me wonder why you cannot weed yourself off these series of donor programs and really look at a commercially viable solution, right? That's the reason why I was doing it. So I think there's value to it, but I think you need to outgrow it and really focus on really scaling and then, getting somewhere where it's more commercially viable. Yeah.
So, unfortunately, we're out of time. For all of you who woke up early for this meeting, I hope you were as blessed as I am. You got your free education. I want to thank Sewu. And do you want to leave us with any parting thoughts before we close?
Come visit Kenya.
I love it. Thank you all.